The Senate's in the midst of considering bilateral tax treaties with Spain, Switzerland, Japan, and Luxembourg. If yesterday's overwhelming votes on the first protocol are any indication, all four will be ratified with huge bipartisan margins by the end of the day. And American businesses and workers in all 50 states will be thrilled to finally be back on fair footing. The details of these nuanced agreements are complicated, but the core principles are quite simple. Foreign trade and international investment are key cornerstones of the U.S. economy. Major parts of proud American businesses and hundreds of thousands of hardworking Americans' jobs are oriented around trade with these four nations. So their governments and our governments sit down and negotiate which country will tax which kind of activities. The result is more clarity, more certainty, and a lot less unfair double taxation that has cost American businesses millions and millions of dollars. So let me say clearly, Mr. President, the years of delays in getting these non-controversial treaties ratified have cost American businesses that employ American workers millions and millions of dollars. Inaction on this subject has needlessly put our firms that employ all of our constituents at a complete disadvantage and delayed capital investments that could have helped American workers. Let me bring this home with some numbers. I've mentioned one Kentucky manufacturer that produces more than a third of all the stainless steel that America makes. They employ 1,500 people. I happen to know this firm is contemplating a capital investment of more than $30 million that would benefit Kentucky workers and provide a shot in the arm for the local economy. But there's been a wrinkle, because this one employer had to pay a $15 million tax bill back in April because we hadn't ratified the agreement with Spain. And if the delay had continued, listen to this, Mr. President, if the delay had continued, an additional $35 million tax liability would have been next, had we delayed. If the Senate had not finally acted on this, this single American manufacturer would have owed $50 million in unnecessary or redundant taxes, had we not acted. For nearly 6 years, this manufacturer has been laboring on an unfair playing field that discouraged them from making investments that could have expanded operations and created more jobs in Kentucky and elsewhere in America. In fact, Mr. President, I'd like to request unanimous consent that the news story containing their CEO's statement on yesterday's ratification of the Spain Treaty be included in the record.
Without objection.
So multiply this kind of story by all the other numerous significant Kentucky companies whom these agreements affect. Then multiply by 50 states because U.S. businesses from coast to coast interact with these four nations. Then consider how many hundreds of thousands of workers all these companies employ. That's the scale of what we're talking about, the highest consequences. So I know job creators across the country are thrilled that the Senate is finally moving forward this week, and I'm certainly proud to have helped resolve this matter. But curiously, Mr. President, it seems that not all of our colleagues are thrilled. Don't get me wrong, the vote totals on the floor have spoken volumes. The cloture vote on the Spain agreement was 94-1, just one senator in opposition, and the treaty was ratified yesterday 94-2. But I was curious to hear one colleague of ours come to the floor yesterday and passionately argue against what I've done as Majority Leader to support these agreements. As the member himself stated, he has made obstructing these tax treaties a year-long personal project. The United States and Spain agreed on this protocol back in 2013. Spain ratified it in 2014. That's when it also arrived here in the Senate. But for nearly 6 years, he's worked to stall ratification. I know because on multiple occasions I sought unanimous consent to secure Senate ratification of this protocol. During that time, he has tried and failed to persuade Treasury departments of 2 different administrations to insist on certain changes that would have required reopening international negotiations. He tried and failed to persuade his colleagues on the Foreign Relations Committee that his ideas were so necessary that we should risk scuttling the whole treaty over them, scuttling all the treaties over them. He tried and failed to persuade the whole Senate. At every step, executive branch officials and Senate colleagues have tried to engage his concerns in good faith. But for 6 years, in the case of the Spain Treaty, 8 years with respect to Switzerland, and 9 years with respect to Luxembourg, he was unable to persuade anybody over 9 years. All that time, no one was persuaded. Partly because the changes he demanded don't solve a real problem. Partly because they would have forced reopening the treaties for even more negotiations. And partly because everybody else was actually listening to the job creators who've been pleading with us for years to get this millstone off their necks. 9 years. 9 years of rejecting reasonable counteroffers and accommodations. 9 years of working to hold up these treaties and trying to sell the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and his Senate colleagues on an off-the-wall story that failed to persuade anyone. Now look, I'm a patient man, but my patience is not inexhaustible. After unanimous consent was denied on multiple occasions, I determined, after consulting with the Treasury Secretary, the Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, that I'd prepare to file cloture on these tax protocols. Yet even after this whole journey, Mr. President, our colleague still was not blocked or shut out of the process. He had his opportunity. A few weeks ago, he had the opportunity to offer amendments to protocols in committee. They failed on a vote of 17-5. Last night, we put 2 more of his amendments up for votes here on the floor. They went nowhere. 9 years is long enough. In fact, it's far too long. Too long for our U.S. businesses to have been either paying needless double taxes or deferring huge amounts of money in dividend payments that could otherwise have been invested right here at home. Year after year, money that could have been immediately used to hire Americans or make new investments had to either be frozen up or handed over in duplicate taxes. All in large part because one of our colleagues could not accept that one single senator who hasn't persuaded his fellow members is not entitled to single-handedly rewrite international treaties. No wonder all kinds of American employers came out of the woodwork yesterday and urged the Senate to reject this misguided amendments and waste no more time in ratifying these treaties. I don't know why the senator believes he was close to a breakthrough after his years of effort. Hope springs eternal, I suppose. Even if he had convinced the administration or his colleagues, the U.S. government would have had to reopen the treaties for negotiation all over again with the other party, which would almost certainly have brought about changes that they wanted. No wonder President Trump's Treasury Department expressed opposition to these amendments. Treasury told senators yesterday that going back and inserting these changes could force a years-long renegotiation of the treaties themselves, jeopardizing their ratification, and have a significant adverse impact on America's standing among the international community. Well, Mr. President, I'm not quite sure what all these years of heel-dragging will have accomplished, except impose unnecessary taxes on Kentucky employers and deferring investments in the United States. I can't see anything to show for this crusade except hurting American businesses for the better part of a decade, all to no effect. But I'm glad we can turn the page this week and get these treaties on the books. I haven't been able to identify a constituency for which he has advocated. But I know that my actual constituents in Carroll County, real people in Kentucky, are sure glad the Senate has taken this important action. It's the right thing to do for the country. It's the right thing to do for Kentucky workers and all the employers nationwide who've been waiting and waiting for this unfair competitive disadvantage to be removed. I'm glad that's exactly what we're doing this week.